Hello there, and welcome to this edition of The Brief. Is of course a special edition. Our main focus today, the Malacca elections. I'll be joined by Dr. Oisan, Irfan, and AZMI Hassan, who will all weigh in to give their insights into the various aspects of today's elections happening as we speak, and basically what we can expect out of it. I'll also bring you the latest updates on what's happening on the ground, all happening today on the brief. And as I bring you the latest now, let's look at what's been happening earlier this morning at Malacca. Earlier this morning, of course, a slight drizzle in several areas in the state did not dampen the Malacca's voters' enthusiasm to go to their respective polling centres as early as 7:30 a.m. to cast their votes in the 15th state election. Now, Bernama, we did a bit of a check earlier today at the polling centres and found that most of the early birds were in fact senior citizens. It was clear that age and limited mobility due to health problems were not a factor for them. At 10 a.m. earlier today, voter turnout was at 17%. That steadied up to 27% at 11 a.m. And we know as of 12 noon, and this is the latest numbers we have, the Malacca polls now stand at a 36% voter turnout. To give us their perspectives a little bit more as to these numbers as well and what are they reflecting, our panelists will come in later to share their views, so do stick around for that. Now, Tanjung Bidara voters want a leader who can develop and administer in the state elections effectively, of course, regardless of whether that person is Malacca's first female chief minister. Tanjung Bidara is in the midst of a three-cornered fight between Perikatan Nasional candidate Datuk Mas Ernie Yati Samsudin, Barisan Nasional's Datuk Seri Ab Rauf Yusof, and Pakatan Harapan's Zainal Hassan. Voters said that the next chief minister will face a huge task which is ahead of them regardless of gender. That doesn't seem to be sort of a clincher anymore because people of Malacca, the voters, are saying they want someone who is going to administer the state effectively. This perhaps also will contribute to who will be the candidate at the end of the day. Now, let's look at the voter turnout. As mentioned earlier, 10 a.m., 17% voter turnout, 11 a.m., 27%, and at 12 noon, 36%. We're seeing this go up by 10 to 9% upon the hour. We don't have the latest numbers beyond that just yet, but this is the latest. Now, the SOPs, the state elections this time, of course, is being governed by a lot of SOPs. There's only one operations center. Candidates are only allowed to have one election operations center in each or per constituency. Capacity is limited to 50%, and social distancing must also be observed. And all election workers are tested. So they have to be tested, and these results must also be updated in the My Sejahtera app, regardless if they're positive or negative as well. From buntings to pamphlets to social media, mobile campaigning, all of this governed by many of the SOPs as well. I'd like to bring in Dr. Oisan, political analyst, now to weigh in a little bit and share some of his thoughts around the elections happening as we speak. Doctor, it's good to see you again. Of course, voter turnout. We're seeing these numbers, Doctor. 10 a.m., 17%. It rose up to 27%. We're past midday, and the latest numbers we have 36% voter turnout. What is this? Is this telling of something at this point, Doctor?
Well, all eyes today, ironically, are on the voters' turnout, right? Instead of on a particular constituency or candidate, with the exception of perhaps what you mentioned, Tanjung Bidara. I think we are looking at, let's say, around 50 to 60% of voter turnout eventually, because up till noon it's only 36%. And you multiply that by 2, it's roughly 70%, but then around 5 something, you close your polls already. So I think we are looking at, let's say, around 60% voters turnout. And that would mean whichever coalition, if they do have the machinery to mobilize their supporters to come out, that particular coalition will have a higher chance of clinching victories in various constituency. Yeah.
Doctor, now to avoid crowding at voting centres, voters have been advised to come in at different time slots. And these time slots have rather been set 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., 10 to 12, 12 to 2, and 2 to 4:30. That leaves us with just one slot that's ongoing right
That's right.
now.
Uh-huh.
It does seem like it's going to be quite a tight space to ensure that that 60% or more, as you mentioned, that how that will achieve. It's going to be perhaps a close call. Let's look at muted campaigns. We know that this year there's no they were not allowed to physically go down to the ground to campaign. Although buntings and some flyers were allowed, social media was encouraged as the main medium to be used to campaign. How has this perhaps influenced traditionally how the candidates are used to campaigning?
You see, those who came out to vote this morning, as you mentioned, are mostly senior citizens, right? With
Mm.
senior citizens, typically you need to so-called press the flash, namely you need to shake hands with them and so on, so that they feel that you are indeed around. I mean, as a candidate. Now that they have come out to vote, and yet the voter turnout is still so low, it really makes you wonder for those younger voters who may be more familiar with sort of online outreach, as well as those out of state voters who will come back to Malacca to vote. It doesn't look like there's a lot of them who are indeed coming out to or coming back to vote, and I think that would especially have a negative effect, perhaps, let's say, on Pakatan Harapan, which would, I mean, depend on a lot of, for example, back to state voters and so on. And I think it remains to be seen. I think we are at most looking at around 60% of voter turnout. Yeah.
That's right. The elderly right now seem to be outnumbering young voters. We are seeing exclusively also in rural seats. Now, of course, under the COVID-19 restrictions as well, what do you think is some of the messages voters are trying to send? We know that they have voiced out, they have said so far they want the candidate to work and serve and produce results. They say no more drama. Doctor.
Yeah, because well, the Malacca state election was brought about by a lot of political drama, right? I mean, assembly persons are withdrawing their support and so on. Shall we put it very bluntly, frogging back and forth. And I think a lot of voters they are now facing a lot of difficulties. When I went down to Malacca, even though some of the voters, sorry, the tourists are coming back, unfortunately, many of the shops are closed. I think they simply could not sort of bring themselves to weather this pandemic, right? So how do you revive some of these small and medium enterprises? I think would indeed be the kind of solutions that your voters are looking for. People having really difficulties trying to maintain their livelihoods, and they are of course not so keen to see yet another round of drama, let's say tonight or tomorrow, with various assembly persons newly elected frogging to one camp or another. Yeah.
That's right. Now, there's a lot of talk around who the next chief minister might be. And at this point, candidates as well are, of course, eyeing that seat. To take off one of the headlines, it says to give PN a chance for the state to have its first female chief minister. What are your thoughts around this?
To put it bluntly, this election has mainly been a contest between Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Harapan, with Perikatan Nasional playing, shall we say, a third fiddle, right? If I were PN or Perikatan Nasional, from a very beginning, I would announce Datu Emayati as the potentially the first female chief minister in the country, right? That I think would galvanize the female voters let us not forget women voters who make up about 50% of the total number of votes. Then you will have
Right.
a fighting chance. Yeah, if I were the campaign manager, I would put her posters, all around the state, right, saying Malacca can make history. In addition to, let's say, Abba or Tan Sri Muhyiddin's posters. So, but by now they are announcing her potential candidacy to be chief minister only 2 days before the voting date. By that time, I
Right.
think it's slightly too late, lah. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, one does wonder perhaps why this was not done earlier to really push her and use her
Mhm.
her skills perhaps and her experience and bring that to the front. Thank you, Doctor, for weighing in and of course,
Thank
as
you.
always, giving us a better perspective of what's going on. We'll wait till later in the day to find out the results and perhaps we'll connect again then. Till then, Doctor, do take
Thank
care and I
you.
will to you
Thank
soon.
you.
That's right. That was Dr. Owi's son, political analyst, weighing in a little bit on the Malacca elections and some of his perspectives. Now, look, the voter turnout as of 10 a.m. earlier today, 17%, and then an hour later, 27%, and at noon, 36%. The Election Commission, the EC, they say that they are quite satisfied with this morning's voting process. And of course, they said all voters that have arrived up till now have been following the standard SOPs. Not one person has been stubborn. This state election has been termed the Battle of Malacca. And of course, as we are still battling through the threat of COVID-19 as well, voters have been told to strictly adhere to SOPs. So physical distancing, wearing a face mask, using hand sanitizer, screening of body temperature, and recording their attendance by scanning the My Sejahtera's quick response codes or QR codes before entering polling stations. These are some of the basic default SOPs that are in place. If anyone has any temperatures higher than 37.5, they will still be allowed to vote, but in separate tents monitored by health officials who are on the ground right now, and they will be arranged to have or rather to undergo further examinations as well. A couple of voting slots, time slots have been recommended, and the last voting slot is from 2 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. today, and that's the slot as we broadcast live right now. That's exactly what's happening there. It's time to bring in my next panelist, Irfan Maharan, Secretary at Pertubuhan Demokrat Sosial, to tell us a little bit about some of his thoughts around Malacca elections. Irfan, it's good to have you on the show as well to hear your perspective. Let's start with the voter turnout. Do you think this has anything to do with social media campaigning or the mobile campaigning that, of course, has been encouraged this time around given the SOPs, Irfan?
Hi, thank you for having me. I've been on the ground since last Thursday, and I've been following several candidates campaigning on the ground. There are a lot of challenges and restriction to the political campaign that is happening throughout Pilihan Raya Negeri Melaka. And the most challenging part is to actually read the sentiment of the voters, since the SOP has stated that the candidates or the mercenary cannot actually go down and meet physically with the voters. So they have to resort to social media campaigning. But then in Malacca, we have seen that the connection and the internet is not that strong. And there lies the challenge. Um, Even though if they push for ceramah on live, they can't really tell how many people from Malacca, the local constituency, actually follow their ceramah. So that is the challenges that they have to face. Um, and 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 from the perspective of young candidates, I can tell that there are different approach between
I feel that Irfan's connection, at least at my end, has been disrupted. We'll wait for Irfan to get back on a better connection. In the meantime, the SOPs around today's voting are very strict. In fact, party agents and candidates who have completed their duties and voters who have already cast their ballots must leave the stations immediately. Again, they have been advised to come in at recommended time slots throughout the day. We saw that start at 8 a.m. today, and the last slot is from 2 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Strict SOPs, social distancing, a face mask, sanitization, screening of body temperatures, and then recording that and the QR code via the QR code in the My Sejahtera app are all important at this point of time. So far, the EC says, hey, look, we're satisfied. There has been no challenges from any of the voters thus far. I'd like to bring in now AZMI HASSAN, Geo-Strategist, to weigh in a little bit as well on his perspective of what's happening in Malacca. AZMI, as always, I always like your perspective because you tell it as it is. The biggest thing at this point of time, voter turnout. Why are these numbers looking to be quite low? It's below half, below 50%. The time is already 2:15. As of 12 p.m., it was only at 36%, Azmi.
Yeah, Jessy, I think the usual case is that at noon, at least it can hit 50% mark, as in GE14, where the turnout is 88%. But to expect 80% above for this state Malacca election under the pandemic era is quite a tall order. But I'm quite sure we will hit 70% or low on the lower part of 70%. 75% as expected by SPR, I think is a good turnout because there are a lot of outside voters that feel they don't have the feeling to come for the Malacca election, Jessy.
Azmi, Irfan is in fact back with a better connection this time. I'd like to bring in Irfan into this conversation as well. Let's make it a three-way conversation, and please feel free to chime in at any point of time, Irfan. I was just speaking to Azmi, of course, of the voter turnout. Now, what are some of the challenges, Azmi, you feel during this particular pandemic and having an election in terms of campaigning? We know the limitations of the SOP. We also know that so far, funnily enough, it's the elders that have come out to vote despite traditional campaigning methods being unavailable. What are some of your thoughts around this? Is this indicative of anything?
No, not really, Jessy. I think the elders usually they come out to vote in the morning. That's the usual case. The younger generation, such as Irfan, I think they waited until the later part. Even though, as you mentioned, SPR gave a slot to advise they vote at this particular slot. I don't think so. Our voters will follow that particular advice from SPR as diligent as possible. When balik kampung, for example, Jessy, Malaysian Highway Authority gave a slot to when to start your journey, but nobody follows. And I guess the same thing for the this particular issue, I think. But I think the voters turnout will pick up a little bit during the late in the afternoon. But I'm really hoping that voter turnout will be above 70%, even though, as you said, Jessy, the campaign has been very, very muted and very boring indeed. And I think SPR has been too rigid in putting out SOP campaign. It's too rigid for me, I think. But again, when Sarawak election come into picture, Jessy, I think there will be some tweaking in terms of SOPs.
Right, okay. But however, I mean, we also see the cases rising. So maybe the strict SOPs also give confidence to the voters to come out and vote. Perhaps that's, something on the mind of voters as well as me. Irfan, if I can direct to you, and I think you're on mute right now, so please do unmute yourself. What are your opinions on perhaps the younger candidates at this point in time? But before you went off earlier, we did talk about the impact of social media. But what are your thoughts around the younger candidates?
Yeah, it is very interesting to see that all political sides, they are pushing more younger, new face candidates in PRN Malacca. But then what I can see is there are a different approach in campaigning when it comes to younger candidates as compared to a seasoned candidates. Younger candidates, they are more tend to campaign through social media. But then the question arises is how many of the messages actually directed to the local voters in Malacca. As we can see that in Malacca, the internet connection is not that great. And that is the challenges that the younger candidates have to actually face, because they have to push their name more as compared to a seasoned candidate because of their new face in the constituency. As compared to seasoned candidates, what I can tell is that they are not pushing their effort too much on social media or media as general. They are more directly into a physical campaigning. I can see that seasoned candidates, they tend to actually go down even more, meeting voters physically as compared to young candidates. So
Right. I
that
just want to
is the
jump in here
challenges.
to update everyone that as of 1 p.m., the latest voter percentage is at 43%. Azmi, you did say that this will really shoot up, and we've seen that in the past hour or so, and hopefully perhaps that 70% can be achieved. Irfan, sorry to sort of jump in there, but 217 polling centers. It involves 1,109 channels. This is a process that involves close to 500,000 normal voters, and this so far is the percentage we are seeing. Irfan and Azmi, perhaps you'd like to also weigh in a little bit. Do you think that this election has been given fair media coverage? Azmi, you mentioned about the Sarawak elections, and perhaps there will be more flexibility around the SOPs and maybe even more hyped up than the Malacca elections. So do you feel that at this point, this elections has been given enough media coverage, Azmi?
Well, I tend to agree with Tan Sri Mahyudin when he lamented that when you watch the media, for example, television, for example, as if only Barisan Nasional is standing. And it is true, because certain media, I don't know why, Barisan Nasional got the highlights. So I think it's not fair for Perikatan Nasional. It is not fair for Pakatan Harapan, because physical campaigning is not allowed. I think when physical campaigning is not allowed, even giving out pamphlets to voters are not allowed, I think that's too much. That's too much, Jessy. I'm not in agreement with SPR, and I'm really hoping that when Sarawak election come along, a more lenient, so that to give more democratic process to the people, so that they can know who the candidates they are voting for.
Irfan, do you perhaps share a different view? Right, we have a connection problem, and again, such is the new norm, Azmi. And speaking of new norm, as well, what we know is that, and as you just mentioned, physical ways to campaign have been very much limited. So in the new norm, public speeches, lectures, door-to-door visits, walkabouts, face-to-face leaflet distribution, all not allowed. We're seeing that number at 43% voter turnout at this point of time, Azmi. There are a lot of things to sort of, unpack here as well. What are perhaps some of your most salient observations of the Malacca state elections this time around?
The Chief Minister designate, Dr. Oh mentioned just now, Perikatan Nasional, only 48 hours before this only announced their Chief Minister, which is Datuk Mas, which is a very significant announcement. They should have announced earlier, because the perception right now is, Jessy, within Perikatan Nasional, especially with PAS and Bersatu, there are some disagreement. Who is the Chief Minister designate? And within Bersatu itself, there is a perception that there is a disagreement who should be the Chief Minister if they can form the government. So by announcing it later, at the later stages, compared to Barisan Nasional and also Pakatan Harapan, perception is built that there is something not right in Perikatan Nasional when naming their Chief Minister designate. I think that's the salient point, and that's a very critical point when the voters go to the poll, who they will vote for the candidate, Jessy.
That's right. We also know from some information previously as well that most of the voters looks to be women and the younger folk as well. Now we see the numbers of the elderly a bit higher today. What are some of the issues you think that must be represented for or must be addressed when the new candidate comes in to gain voter confidence at that point?
One thing for sure is that that particular or all the candidates need to ensure that when the state government is formed, it's going to be a very stable government, not one or two extra seats they have. I think more than 4 or 5 extra seats. So the voters need to think that when they vote for a candidate, the party that the candidate represents can form a government. The ideal situation is that only one entity can form the government, meaning that if, let's say, Perikatan Nasional can form the government, they don't need help from Barisan Nasional, or they don't need any help from Pakatan Harapan. I think in this way, we can have a very stable government. I think that's the way to go when the voters are in the polling station, vote for a candidate, vote for a stable party, Jessy.
That's right. Every vote will count in determining the future of Malacca at this point. Irfan, welcome back. Please do unmute yourself. We don't have much time left on the clock, Irfan, but just like to hear some of your thoughts or perhaps your parting thoughts on the Malacca state elections in general.
Yeah, my last thought on PRN Melaka. I think the next trend for PRU is younger candidates will be contest in general election, and this is a very good trend for younger representatives in political party, and those people can actually bring up the youth voices into Dewan Rakyat or Dewan Undangan Negeri. I think there should be more space for people like me in politics, and this is a very good trend that we see.
That's right. The Battle of Malacca is ongoing right now as it forms its new state government. AZMI, Irfan, thank you for joining me and weighing in. And I guess we'll all wait at the edge of our seats to see the results later today. Thank you very much and do take care. I will speak to you soon. That has been this edition of The Brief, a very special edition on the Malacca state elections. Big thanks to all my guests. We look forward for more and what's happening with the Malacca elections. I'm Jessy Chahal. Thanks for watching.